A teenage girl is murdered all because of a stupid lie. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Adrianne Jones. Viewer discretion is advised. Adrianne Jessica Jones was born on June 18th, 1979, and she lived her entire life in Mansfield, Texas. She was the oldest of three kids. She did also have two younger brothers. Adrianne and the two brothers, they grew up in a good home, but it was also a very strict home. But the strictness never seemed to really bother her at all. Adrianne attended Mansfield High School, where she was a track star. She absolutely loved doing track. She also was very popular in school. She had a lot of friends. She got along with people really, really easily. Adrianne was basically considered to be your all-American teenage girl. She did not run with the wrong crowds. She did not get involved in anything like drugs or alcohol. She was a good student. She got good grades. She did a lot of extracurricular activities at school. And, most importantly, Adrianne had hopes and she had dreams for her future. But it was a future that would never come. It was December 4th, 1995. A man in Grand Prairie, Texas, pictured here, was walking on his farm property when he found something that at first looked like, as they always say, a mannequin. But upon a closer look, he realized this was not a mannequin. This was a human body. It appeared to be a younger female. Her feet, which were bare, were tangled up in barbed wire. It was more than obvious that this young woman had been shot. She had one gunshot wound to her forehead, and the other one went through her cheek. So the man calls police, and police arrive to process the scene. This young woman, her head was lying on top of the two casings, and so they knew that she was killed right there where she was found. This was not a situation where she was murdered elsewhere and then just dumped here. This is where she was killed. And these gunshots were at close range, and so what it looked like is if she was on the ground, lying down, probably screaming, begging for this person not to do what they were about to do, but the person, while standing over her, fired the gun twice, killing her. She also had a pretty severe blunt force trauma injury to the back of her head. She had definitely been struck by some kind of instrument. They also know she was killed there in that spot because in her hand she was clutching grass. She couldn't have done that if she was already dead. This was also a freezing cold winter. It was very cold, and the victim was found in just a pair of shorts, a light t-shirt, and some socks. Certainly not dressed for cold weather, which would make police believe that she may have been abducted from somewhere inside somewhere. Or maybe she had been out for just a quick moment when someone took her. She was lured out of her home. They don't know. But it did not appear that she was outside willingly based on her attire. There was no ID found with the body. And so at first she was a Jane Doe because they had no idea who she was. But it would not take long for them to find out because earlier that same morning, a teenage girl was reported missing by her parents. The teenage girl was missing from Mansfield, Texas. Her name was Adrianne Jones. And once they knew that, they were able to quickly identify their victim, in fact, as 16-year-old Adrianne Jones. When her parents were, talked to by police, and the police asked them, can you think of anything that happened that night that may have been something that we need to know about? And her mom said that Adrianne had answered a phone call from another high school student, a senior at the high school, so a couple grades ahead of Adrianne. This boy's name was David Graham. And then one of Adrianne's younger brothers said they heard what sounded like Adrianne sneaking out of the window of her bedroom, something that as a teenage girl she did, from time to time. Her parents weren't really like looking at it as a concerning type of thing. But now it is, because who did she leave the home for in the middle of the night. So police want to talk to David Graham, seeing as how they know he and Adrianne had talked that night on the phone. David Graham says, sure, I'll cooperate, whatever you guys want to know. He gave an alibi. He was studying with his girlfriend at the time. They also asked him, well, did you call Adrianne that night? Did you speak to her? He actually said, no, I didn't talk to her at all, so I don't know what that's about. They spoke to David Graham's girlfriend, and she confirmed his alibi. So they were like, okay, well, maybe it's not this guy. Now, they know Adrianne had not been raped. There was no sign of a rape whatsoever. So there was no sexual motive here. And so they begin to kind of question Adrianne's friends at school. Maybe she had gotten into some kind of fight with another high schooler. Maybe she had dated someone who had a jilted ex or something along those lines, but they really couldn't find anything that way either. Really, the only evidence they have was her body and the bullets and casings. She had been shot by what they determined was a Russian Makarov 9mm. But unfortunately, after, striking out with David Graham, after striking out with all of the friends and family, not being able to really determine exactly who may have wanted to do this, the case, it kind of quickly goes cold, and they have nothing to really work with. And for the next 8 months, they're just hoping against hope that someone will come forward with something. And finally, someone did, 1,000 miles away. They got a call or a tip from Annapolis, Maryland, and this was from someone at a U.S. Naval Academy out there. This person says that one of their other cadets there, a girl named Diane Zamora, had confessed that she knew that Adrianne, who killed Adrianne Jones. So Diane tells these cadets that her boyfriend shot and killed Adrianne Jones because he was the best boyfriend ever. Because the boyfriend was showing his devotion to Diane Zamora. And Diane was essentially boasting about this. I mean, she seemed to be almost giddy about it. And so police are informed about this, 1,000 miles away. And that's when they realize that Diane Zamora is someone they've already talked to, because she was the girlfriend who confirmed the alibi of David Graham. Well, now here she is 8 months later and 1,000 miles away. Now that she's at the Naval Academy, suddenly David Graham comes back into focus. Diane Zamora and David Graham had been high school sweethearts. That's where they met. And they were, by all accounts, madly in love with one another. They were like the perfect fit, the perfect couple. Their plan was to get married eventually, have kids, have their own family. But that would never happen for them either. Now, at this point, 8 months later, David Graham is now in Colorado, and he is there with the Air Force. And the more they looked into David and Diane, they found out from friends and acquaintances that they had not just this wasn't just like they were madly in love with each other. They were obsessed with one another, like truly obsessed. The moment any one of them did something even just slightly wrong, it would really piss off the other one. But in August of 1996, police in Texas traveled to Maryland, where they speak to Diane Zamora. Well, she tells police, yeah, I told that to the other cadets, but it was just me being silly. I was lying. It wasn't truthful. So no, it wasn't David. It wasn't me. At this point, a leave of absence is basically ordered for Diane Zamora while this case is under investigation. They next go to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where they talk to David. Now, at that point, when they reach David, he and Diane are now back together, like physically together, in the same location. The Air Force required David to take a lie detector test. It was not a suggestion. It was, you're going to do this. And so because he was ordered to do it, he did it. He failed miserably with regards to the murder of Adrianne. So the Air Force personnel, they have a sit down with David. They say, listen, you really tanked this test. You are being extremely deceptive. You are not telling the truth. You need to sit down with these police from Texas and you have got to tell them the truth because it's the right thing to do. David Graham obeys the order. He sits down with the detectives from Texas and he confesses. He says that on November 4th, 1995, roughly a month before the murder, there was a track meet, which he was also on the track team with Adrianne. And after that particular track meet, he offered to take Adrianne home. She said, okay, thank you so much. He then says that at that point, he and Adrianne have consensual sex in his car. David Graham, feeling guilty, eventually tells Diane, his girlfriend, I was unfaithful. I slept with this Adrianne Jones girl. And Diane was absolutely insanely livid. This really sent her off. And according to David, Diane said, the only way you can make this right is if you kill Adrianne. Kill her for me. So on the night of December 3rd, 1995, he does in fact call Adrianne, and he lures her out to his car. She was already basically in her pajamas, which is why she was dressed the way she was dressed. She thought this was going to be like a quick conversation. She gets into the car. David starts to drive away. What Adrianne does not know is that in the trunk of that same car is Diane Zamora. When David gets to his intended location, that's when Diane Zamora pushes the back seat down and climbs out of the trunk, and she and David begin to both attack Adrianne. David Graham says he attempted to snap Adrianne's neck, but he couldn't do it. And so Diane found a weight in the car, and she took that weight and she smashed it into the back of Adrianne's head, which is where the blunt force trauma injury came from. Adrianne manages to escape from this situation, and she begins to run. And David's like, this is like, he says, to our horror, Adrianne began to run away. Well, because it's horror because she can't get away, because if she does, we're done, we're cooked. But because of the severe head trauma, Adrianne eventually kind of fell to her knees. And then she fell to the ground, and that's when David, standing over her as she was on the ground. And so David takes out his gun, the Makarov 9mm, points it at Adrianne's head, fires one round that goes through her cheek. She's still alive, and so he shoots her one more time in her forehead, killing her. So now police want to question Diane because David has just implicated her in the murder. And Diane tells police, quote, Graham so violated her lifelong thoughts about love and marriage that she decided that the only way he could make it right was to kill Adrianne Jones, end quote. And so she's also admitting that she basically ordered the murder of Adrianne based off of this belief that he had sex with Adrianne, because that's what he told Diane. At this point, they're able to get search warrants to search all the properties that David and Diane had been in since the murder, and that included David's father's home. They found the weight with blood still on it, like almost a year later, and they found the gun, in which they were able to confirm through ballistics testing that this was, in fact, the murder weapon. This is what she was shot and killed with. So the physical evidence is pretty damning at that point. David Graham and Diane Zamora are both arrested and are both charged with capital murder, which in Texas, you could get the death penalty pretty easy because they execute a lot of people. Diane and David would have separate trials. Diane would go first. At this point, by the way, this is already such a public story. This story was all over the country and quite honestly, all over the world. They had already made a made-for-TV movie about this case. It's been featured on the cover of People magazine. This was a very almost glamorized murder case that everyone seemed to be very enthralled with. And so they feared her defense team, or both defense teams, that they weren't going to get a fair trial because everyone already knew about the case. But you had to have a trial. Diane goes on trial on February 2nd, 1998. Diane takes the stand in her trial, and she says that this was all David. David did all of this. He planned it. He orchestrated it. I didn't have anything to do with it. Almost trying to paint herself as a victim as well. But then they had several witnesses take the stand. People from the Naval Academy that was with Diane, other friends from high school, acquaintances, and many of them said that Diane was very boastful about Adrianne's murder, saying things like she deserved what she got. She was calling Adrianne a tramp and a whore. She said to these friends and people at the Naval Academy that she was just a slut that deserved to die. Many people would confirm these words, and so they knew that Diane was very much involved in this, and she really was the ringleader. She was the one to say, you gotta kill her. And David, being the obsessive boyfriend who doesn't want to lose Diane, says, you got it, babe. Diane also tries to say that I was abused by David. He was a very abusive boyfriend. He was very mean. He hit me all the time. There was no evidence or proof of that whatsoever. She basically was saying all this with the crocodile tears on the stand to show the jury that she was a victim, but no one bought it. Diane Zamora was found guilty of capital murder, but the jury decided that she would not be sentenced to death. Instead, she would be sentenced to life in prison. Then, July of 1998, David Graham's trial now begins. He also felt that he was going to be getting an unfair trial because Diane's trial had already happened. It was already all over the news, in the newspapers, all over the country, all over the world. Not to mention the made-for-TV movie that was done about this, the People magazine thing, glamorized, all that. And so he also felt like, how are we going to do this? But we got to do it. And then the bombshell came at his trial. A fellow student was called to the stand by David's defense team, and it was a girl or a woman named Wendy. Wendy says that on the night that David Graham said he drove Adrianne home, the night that he had sex with her in his car, well, this student says that's not true because it was me. I drove Adrianne home that night, which was a believed story. And so what they found out, and David's defense team was like, well, see, there's no motive anymore because I didn't have sex with Adrianne, blah, 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 blah. But that actually ends up hurting his case even more because he wasn't the one to take Adrianne home that night, which means he didn't have sex with her that night, which means that when he went to Diane Zamora and confessed about having sex with Adrianne Jones, it was a lie. It wasn't even true. It didn't happen. So he wanted to make Diane jealous. He wanted like that emotion from it. And Diane completely reacted and she said, you need to kill her now. And he just sort of kept going with it. He's like, okay, let's do it. But again, because he lied about the Adrianne, having sex in the car thing, that doesn't make him less guilty. That makes him look even worse. It makes him look like a monster beyond a monster, like truly awful. David Graham is also found guilty of the murder of Adrianne Jones, capital murder, but he too is not given the death penalty. He is sentenced to life in prison, and he and Diane are both going to be eligible for parole when they turn somewhere around 60 years old. So they've still got a lot of time left to serve. But that doesn't mean they're going to be released either. That just means that's when the first time they can ask for parole. These two are cold, evil, calculated, monstrous pieces of human garbage. First of all, David lies about even having sex, which is what set this whole thing off. But Diane's like, you need to kill her because of this. Why is that the first thing that comes to her mind? You need to kill this girl. Not let's, prank her or do something kind of shitty to her. Let's just kill her. That's what she thought of. And David's like, he should have said, no, whoa, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. He says instead, okay, I'll do it because I love you, Diane. I love you so much that I'm going to kill this girl that I didn't actually have sex with, which you believe I did. Shitty people. Both very shitty people. Awful. And there is no doubt that they both did this. There is no arguing it. Everyone knows they did it. They're guilty. Adrianne, when this, I have to imagine what she was thinking, like when this all started to happen, she's probably thinking, what are we doing? Like, why is this happening? Because she didn't have sex with him. She knows that. So she doesn't really understand why she's being attacked. As far as she knows, she was just randomly lured out of her house to be killed. That's it. And that's what it was. Just horrendous people, man. Horrendous. People like this just really pissed me off so much. But thankfully, both of those monsters are in prison and they will be there for a very long time. They will both be almost elderly by the time they are even able to get out of prison. But hopefully they don't. And really, it's all thanks to those cadets in Maryland who came forward with that information, because if they did not come forward with that confession that Diane made about boasting and all that, this case may not have been solved, at least not quickly. This may have taken a much longer time to find evidence and nail down this killer, or killers as it were. Thankfully, they did get that tip fairly quickly. And in the end, Adrianne Jones, just 16 years old with her life fully ahead of her, with hopes and dreams, who never got to go to prom, who never got to graduate high school, who never got to have her first job, meet her first, or have her first boyfriend, get married, have children. None of that got to happen for her. But what did happen is that Adrianne Jones was able to get the justice that she very rightfully deserved. But that is it with this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you're new here, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. Drop a like, drop a comment below. That way more people can see the video. Hit the bell so you're notified of when I post new videos. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to my TikTok is in the link tree, which is in the description of the video below. You'll also find my case list in that link tree. It's completely free for you guys to look through. If there is a case you want me to cover that is not on that list, send me a quick email. My email is also listed below. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened, and I'll add it to my list. Typically, I can't promise you when I'll cover that case because I usually pick these cases at random. However, if you are a loved one to a murdered person who maybe their case is unsolved, it's a cold case, or it's a missing person, or maybe it's solved and you still want their story told, just let me know in the email that you are a direct loved one and I can make sure that case gets a higher priority. But that is it for this video, True Crime Rooney. So until the next case, ta-ta for now. Don't sing. Okay.